everybody. I'm Carolyn Hadlock, and this is the Eunoia Podcast. Eunoia is the Greek word for beautiful thinking, and that's what the show is all about. I interview beautiful thinkers who are creatives, founders, authors, and CEOs, and I try to get inside their heads. Today, I am with Giovanni Corazza. He is the president of the Marconi Foundation and founder of the Marconi Institute for Creativity, and he is based in Bologna, Italy. Thank you so much for joining our show. It's so nice to have you.
Thank you very much for inviting me. It's a pleasure.
Well, I was anxious to talk to you because I saw your TED Talk. I know you've done a couple, but I saw I think the first one about thinking outside of the box. And so much of what you spoke of and what you do is relevant to what I do. However, you come from an academic discipline, and I think you have an engineering background. Do I have that right?
Yeah, that's right. I'm an engineer working in creativity and innovation, so it's kind of a strange combination, but actually it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, you're kind of the proof of my thinking as well, because I come from the creative side as an executive creative director, but somebody who sees a void in the business world of creativity, and that's really kind of the mission of my blog Eunoia, is to inspire people who don't think of themselves as creatives to shift their thinking.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the fact that somebody is creative or not creative would be tantamount to saying that somebody can speak English or cannot speak English. Of course, we all have that potential and we need to develop it. And there are many different ways for doing that. And I think now, as you say, it's the time for taking this discipline, which is a discipline, in a serious way.
Well, yeah, especially now. And I definitely want to dig into your two talks were obviously before the pandemic, but the place that might make sense to start is, I know the Marconi Foundation was founded in 1938, has been around for a while. However, you started the Institute for Creativity in 2011, and I would just love to hear why and how that came to be.
Well, essentially, it starts from communication technologies that have really revolutionized the world, starting from the second half of the 20th century. So we're all interconnected, and we all have access to all information that we can find on distributed multimedia databases around the world, essentially in no time. So if we have knowledge gaps for companies or different people, now these can be filled in a time which is orders of magnitude smaller than it used to be only 20 or 30 years ago.
Yeah.
So where does that bring us to? I mean, the fact that we have information as a commodity, that has consequences for education. It has consequences for the job market, but it also has consequences for our dignity as humans, because our dignity in the previous forms of society was really related to what we knew and the competences that we had in our profession. That was who we were, essentially. But if now our mind is extended by technology, we tend to know in the limit everything. There is no difference anymore. Of course, I'm exaggerating, but that is the trend. The only thing that can make a difference between us and between competing companies is what you do, what you generate out of this common shared layer of information. So creativity becomes a necessity and not anymore a luxury as it used to be in the past. And if it is a necessity, it has to become a discipline. You have to teach it, starting from schools, of course, and universities. And that is when we realized this fact, this is when we founded the Marconi Institute for Creativity. So next year, we will celebrate the 10th anniversary for that.
When you talk about education, were you looking more at the college level or going all the way back to elementary school?
So we started from the University of Bologna because that's where I teach as an engineer. And so we started to have courses on creativity and innovation at the university level. But with the Marconi Institute for Creativity, we work all the way down to primary school, elementary school level.
Well, and that's interesting because we talk about that even at the agency I'm with about being a student, that we are not experts in anything, and that being a student is a more intelligent place to be. And it's interesting because I was listening to your other TED Talk, and you were talking about that Grand Canyon of having to disassociate yourself from the things that you know in that sort of expert status. Does the Institute work with professional organizations as well once people are into their professional careers?
Of course we do. We do work with professionals in different domains. We started from engineering, of course, but this topic and this discipline is really transversal to all disciplines. We do cross-pollination exercises between scientific domains and humanistic domains. So there is really no boundary with respect to which you cannot apply these concepts, principles, and then the methods. But I also wanted to say that this idea that the more we go through a certain style of thinking and a certain pattern of thinking, so it becomes easier and easier to excite that pattern depending on the inputs that come from the outside world through our senses. And that is the canyon, the fact that you have immediate responses that don't even take any time or any effort at conscious level before you utter the response, essentially. And the exercise for being creative is really to slow down this natural modality and start to perceive the inputs from the outside world, start to pay attention to small details, go back up and try to excavate a new canyon. So that means slowing down your thinking process, allowing for alternatives to open up, and spending much more energy than the minimum necessary for simple survival.
Is it fair to say that creativity does happen when you do those cross-pollination of adjacent disciplines, or can it happen inside of your own vertical expertise?
So as we say, the structure of our brain is biocultural. There is a genetic imprinting, but there is a lot of work which is done by experience. Of course, both positive and unfortunately also negative experiences shape our brains. And that means that through age, as you grow and you have more knowledge, then you start having the ingredients to really generate ideas that have value in all disciplines. But at the same time, these pieces of information that you acquire, they, as we said, they have a double edge. They are necessary, but if you stick to them and if you consider them as being unchallengeable in a sense, then they also become obstacles. And we talk about epistemological obstacles in that sense, the fact that if you're the highest expert in a discipline, then it becomes more difficult for you to generate ideas. From this point of view, the cross-pollination exercise that you were mentioning is very useful because it forces you to see your own discipline from the eyes of another, possibly totally different discipline. And that does not mean that you're working across disciplines, but you're taking, for example, principles from linguistics and you apply that to science.
Is there any particular discipline that you have found that is easier to sort of deprogram their brains to get to a creative state, or any kind of industry that is more prone, or another one that is more resistant?
Well, of course, creativity is normally associated with the arts, but even in the arts, you can become very, very conformal to styles and trends. So it's not necessary that if you're an artist, you are very creative. I think there are many examples of artists, for example, in music that come out with the first album, let's say. And then once this reaches success, they become essentially trapped in that style. And if they try to change, people don't listen to you anymore. And so you have to go back to that. So even in the arts, creativity is not necessarily an easy game. But even in science or in math, in places where you would not think that being creative is possible at all, actually, if you read books from great thinkers like Henri Poincaré, for example, you see that their method to find solutions to very difficult mathematical problems is really very much related to the creative process. So really, as I said before, there is no boundary. All disciplines can be the subject of creative thinking.
Is this an overstatement to say that creativity can be a science?
It's not an overstatement because there is a process going on in our brain as we think creatively. So there exists a science, which is the neuroscience of creativity. There is an approach at a psychological cognitive level. So there's creative cognition. You can study that. Of course, there are attitudes and personality elements related to creativity. So you can study personality for creative people. You can study creativity in teams. So you start to have dynamics between different people, and you can study that in the framework of, for example, professional work in companies. And we just recently published a so-called socio-cultural manifesto for creativity, which means studying creativity at socio-cultural level. So what are the characteristics of societies that favor or stifle creativity? What are the consequences of working with certain audiences or others? Because whatever we do, even if it's not creative, we are always thinking of an audience that will listen.
Was there a finding in that manifesto that surprised you?
So we posed 12 questions that are now open for research, and therefore there are no answers yet. But I can tell you that the most exciting idea for me is the fact that creativity is not even confined to the human species, to Homo sapiens. Animals can be creative, can solve problems in a creative way. And if you take a wide sense approach to creativity, you can find surprising trajectories of evolution in biology. And you can find surprising, original, effective trajectories of evolution in matter, so in physics, without even the need for life. So inanimate matter can be creative. How is that possible? It's possible because we have had, since the start of our cosmos, an explosion of energy that keeps our universe away from equilibrium. And in those conditions, we have the possibility in these complex conditions that trajectories emerge that are not predictable. And that is the wide sense interpretation of creativity at the level of matter. Let me give you a concrete example so it's more clear. For example, if you are a vine, you have the problem that animals climbing on trees like to eat you because you're very soft, much softer than the tree itself. So there is one specific type of vine that lives in Chile. It's called Bocchilla trifoliata, that has found a creative solution to this problem. The problem being try not to be eaten by the animals. The solution is that this vine imitates the shape of the leaf of the tree upon which it is climbing. But if the same plant, so a single root, climbs first on one tree, then on a second tree, and a third tree, it's the same plant, it changes the shape of its leaves. So it's actually seeing the shape of the leaves of the tree upon which it is wandered upon, and then imitates that kind of leaf in order to confuse the animals.
So it's sensory, but it's not sentient.
Yeah, it's not sentient in the way that we, of course, have talked about conscience for humans, but it has a form of conscience of its own, let's say.
Interesting. So what, in your mind, what are the implications for those kinds of findings back onto humans?
Back onto humans. So we have different layers of complexity. There's the physical layer with the explosion in the number of galaxies. So since 13.7 billion years ago, when we had the Big Bang, we have now 2 to the 12th, which means 1,000 billion galaxies. Then we have the complexity of the biological world with 5 billion species since the start of life on Earth. And then you have the layer of complexity of the human side, so the social, psychological, social layer of complexity. And then there's a final layer, which is the artificial intelligence layer.
I was going to ask about that, yeah.
Yeah, which we created. And now we have these machines that can start to generate solutions which are not predictable by the human side. So, of course, they have been programmed by the humans, but the results that come out of these machines cannot be predicted. And that means that it becomes difficult for a human to understand if a certain design, for example, design of an electronic circuit, has been generated by a human or by a machine. So there's a form of Turing test, in this case of a patent submitted to the patent office, and the officer is not able to understand whether this patent proposal comes from a machine or a human. That is the Turing test. The Turing test is the fact that when you pass it, it is not possible anymore to understand if it's a human product or an artificial product.
What do you think are the implications then for artificial intelligence on our creativity?
That is a very interesting question because, of course, we think of creativity as the last frontier for humans in the evolution of the job market. The machines will take on all routinary activities and everything that is algorithmic, and humans will be the creative side. So if now machines can also be creative, that becomes a problem, of course, for us. But the fact is that machines will never be able to perform the entire creative process, which means having an intuition, following your instinct, understanding what people need just by looking in their eyes, imagining the future. And then once you generate ideas, and you can use machines to help you doing that. So you can use the help of artificial intelligence in the generation stage, but then extracting the value of these ideas requires sensitivity, requires imagination, requires future studies, because you have to imagine the possible future in which your ideas has the highest possible value. And all of these preparation stages and extraction of value stages cannot be done well by machines. So I guess that in the end, it will be a collaboration between the human side and the artificial side.
Is that what led you to one of the things you sent me in advance was this idea of organic creativity? Was that a response to this?
Yeah, organic creativity means that when you're being creative, you can reach a status of wellness. When you train for creativity and you use creativity, essentially, you're developing an ability to change your point of view and to see reality from different points of view, because that is where creative ideas will come from, in this flexibility. And this has an indirect but measurable and statistically valid effect on the perceived distance between different groups in society, which means if you train creativity, if you distribute creativity in society, you will reduce discrimination. You will reduce racism without never talking about discrimination, without ever talking about racism. People will feel closer together to one another just because they are trained at looking at reality from different points of view. But also in our philosophy, in what we try to do, we try to say that everyone should develop their own creativity. So we don't foresee, even in companies, we don't foresee a special division of creative people, then all the rest will just execute. But our preferred approach is horizontal. We try to get people from all divisions in a company and put them around the table. And that is when we get the best results. So really our mission for us is to distribute in a very democratic way creativity to all the population. And that is the organic creativity target for us.
One of the things I was reading in the Harvard Business Review, there was a man wrote a pretty scathing account of creativity inside of business, almost saying it was reckless to bring creativity into the workplace. And in his defense of his theory was that different businesses have organizations and organizing principles which are antithetical to creativity. So by bringing people in and having them generate ideas that may not be implemented within the organization is setting them up to fail. Have you seen that? Have you encountered that?
Well, I have to say that I partially agree, and that may surprise you, because what we say is that you cannot always be creative. Creativity in certain conditions can also be detrimental, can also be negative, can also distract you. You have a core business and you have products that are going well. You need to keep investing on those. So the investment on creativity will always be a fraction. So it can never be 100% of the investment of R&D in a company or innovation at management level in a company. We say that 1 to 5% of investment of your resources is more than sufficient if you do this in a systematic way, if you have methodologies and you understand the process. So in that sense, creativity is something that you need to manage. It's not something you just throw in a company and that will solve everything. There's a time and a place for doing creative work, and then you have to bring that work and the results of that work to concrete results. So you have to implement the solutions and launch the new products and etc. All of that is really a way of doing business that has specific rules, if you want. But it's not a revolution in terms of everything becomes creative. We need to develop intelligence and creativity together. And the balance between the two is the critical element. Right now, let's say that in traditional schools, the balance is completely towards intelligence and creativity is almost 0%. But even 100% creativity would be wrong. So it's really a matter of finding the correct balance between brilliant ideas, fast answers, and working within the box. And then sometimes orbit outside of the conventional way of thinking and try to come back with ideas that are both original and effective. It's something that you do for a minority of your time and resources, but this small investment is very, very significant.
What's the difference between creativity and innovation?
Okay, they can be seen as different stages of a process,
Yeah.
But creativity, you can have creativity without innovation. So you can generate ideas just for the pleasure of doing that, for the wellness that it brings. And only a small percentage of the ideas that you generate will take the path of a research and development effort and then become real products or new services or innovation in the management of the organization. So the innovation part, which requires the actual implementation of an idea to change the practices or to change your portfolio of products and services, is probably reserved to a small fraction of the ideas that you generate. And you can also innovate without inventions. You can innovate without creativity. You can innovate in a company by following a trend that has been set by some other pioneer company. So in that case, you're doing innovation without creativity.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I'd like to talk a little bit about how you think this COVID and this pandemic is impacting creativity. Are you seeing anything now or into the future? What are your theories on that?
Okay, so that is a very hot topic, of course. Many people working on the impact of COVID in different domains. So we've done some studies also. We've done an international study within Italy, France, Poland, and the US with more than 1,000 participants to see if being creative can mitigate the effects of COVID-19 and of the lockdown specifically.
Mm-hmm.
And the results are positive in the sense that people that have higher self-concept for creativity, so they feel they are creative, and people that are better at performing in the tests that we do to measure, for example, divergent thinking skills, they are more effective in moderating the stress or distress that comes from being in lockdown, and they are more effective in reducing the effect of depression that comes from lockdown. But then a few years from today and from this age, we will look back and see what kind of an effect this lockdown has had, because for sure, reducing social relations and reducing movement, reducing traveling, all of these are negative effects, and all of this has reduced the perspective of people. And I think it will take some years before we really can recover from all of that.
Yeah, if you think about even corporate culture, I don't even know how you have culture at this when everybody's working from home, because you're disenfranchising people from each other, which is creating almost a vacuum in culture.
Absolutely. And right now, maybe we don't feel it because it's only been a few months. But if we keep going like this for a year or two, then the effects will be long lasting. Of course, there's all the virtual world perspective that is really open to be studied. And we've done some work in that area too. There are some evidences of the fact that if you design a virtual world that is favorable for creativity, so for example, you create a virtual world on a tropical island and you start generating ideas in that environment, this has a measurable effect on your performance. The freedom that you have in designing different worlds in the virtual domains and using artificial intelligence also to create something that is dynamic and not just static. All of these are avenues for the future research and future exploitment for sure.
Yeah. A lot of what I think about with creativity is it benefits from constraints. And when you have a fantastic world or a world that's not real that you can design however you want, you're not going to design in those tensions and those constraints. So it could actually inhibit creativity.
Constraints are very important, but the critical aspect in the process is when you apply the constraints. And let's say that when you do problem solving, you have the constraints from the start. When you do creative problem solving, you relax some of the constraints. But when you do free exploration of an area, that does not mean that you don't have constraints, but that you apply them a posteriori. So you have to go out, use your fantasy, exploit these degrees of freedom, maybe go out of the physical world, but then you have to come back. And that's when you apply the constraints.
Yeah, well, it's almost like gravity. You need the pull to bring you back. Do you think that creativity differs in different cultures?
Yes, absolutely. There are cross-cultural studies of creativity and comparative studies of creativity across different cultures. And the evidence is that what we normally talk about is really the Western idea of creativity.
Mm-hmm.
You go to different cultures, Eastern cultures, the idea of creativity changes. One aspect which is very different is the importance of the individual as opposed to the work of the community. And also the stress on originality, which is very important for us, becomes less important in other cultures. Another element which is different in different cultures is the personality characteristic, which is the openness to experience, which is fundamental in the Western world and much less so in other parts of the world. But still they are creative, so it's a different form of creativity.
Yeah. Okay, so as we sort of wind down, had you ever heard of the word eunoia before?
Well, you introduced me to that, but of course it's a Greek word, and yeah, the prefix EU it means good and or wellness. Yeah, it's a nice word actually. So good choice.
Oh well, thank you. And so one of the things, and you've dedicated much of your career to this, but how would you define beautiful thinking?
Beautiful thinking. Well, I think that the aesthetic effect of thinking of something which is truly original and surprises you, and then surprises the audience, surprises other people, that brings a form of joy and excitement. So emotions drive the process. Emotions gives you the energy, the excess energy with respect to the minimum that you need to survive. And therefore, beautiful thinking is really beautiful in an aesthetic sense. It moves your emotions.
Ah, very nice. Very nice. Well, thank you so much for your time.
Absolutely. Thank you, and congratulations for your work, and a good long life to Eunoia.
Thank you. Thank you. I hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as we did. And I hope you took something from it. something that'll help you with your next meeting, next pitch, your next big project. But above all, I hope it inspires you to think strange, different, new, and beautiful thoughts. For more from this interview and other chats with beautiful thinkers, visit CarolynHadlock.com to subscribe on Medium and follow @Unoia Quarterly on Instagram. That's EUNOIA Quarterly.